the science is really important. Understanding and that deep data-driven understanding of where consumers are, what they want, what they're doing today is absolutely critical. That gives you deep insight. But you need to add a little bit of creativity and a bit of art and magic on top to get that magic. And to Jane's point, it's not as critical. It's probably even more critical in the digital space than it is in more traditional media.
For some reason, you've created a feeling of unsubstitutability. So people are unwilling to substitute you for something else. They want your brand, more than any other one. Being meaningfully different is something that brands need to constantly keep on top of. Obviously, it's a movable feast. You need to keep being different and relative to your competitors. It's a changing market.
Hello and welcome to the AdTech Heroes podcast. In today's episode, we are going to talk about research and insights within our industry, and I'm delighted to be joined by Jane Ostler and Tony Costella. Jane is the EVP Global Thought Leadership at Kantar, and Tony is the Global Marketing and Insights Director at Heineken. Hi Jane, hi Tony, how's it going?
All good, bit cold, but fine.
Great, good to meet you, Dal.
Let's start with your careers. I'd love to know a little bit more about it and what's got you to where you are today. So should we start with you, Jane?
Sure, yeah. Well, I originally trained as an architect, actually, and qualified as an architect. Then there was a recession, so I moved swiftly into advertising, and I was a kind of general all-round research and new business assistant in a very groovy agency. And then moved into a new media role, it was called at the time, and then went to bigger agencies, media agencies like Mindshare, ad agencies like Ogilvy, JWT, running digital teams there. Then I worked on the marketing side for 10 years, actually more than that, doing the digital TV switchover in the United Kingdom, and then worked in radio for a while, and then moved into market research. So it kind of makes sense in retrospect, but didn't at the time.
Wow, architect to media and advertising and marketing. Wow, that's quite a big shift, right? And how about you, Tony?
Yeah, so I've had all of my career in insights and analytics, strategy, that field. I actually studied maths at university, but realized that though I love analytics and digging into numbers and data, I actually also really love people. And so when I heard of market research as a field, I immediately understood that was my calling. So I did actually my internship at Procter & Gamble, then after I graduated, spent 10 years at P&G, originally in the UK, Belgium, Singapore, back to Belgium across some of their major categories. After that, moved to financial services, to MasterCard for a number of years, then came back to consumer goods in Reckitt Benckiser before joining Heineken, based here in Amsterdam 7.5 years ago.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Just out of interest, is there any sector that you've liked more than the other?
I'm biased, of course. I've been here for a number of years. The beer industry is a fascinating one from business point of view, but obviously also a category that I'm very passionate about. So I would have to say beer.
From a consumption point of view as well, I'd say. Right,
absolutely, yeah.
Brilliant. Let's get straight into it. Tony, while I've got you here as a brand, what are you guys looking for when it comes to insights?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to understand. At Heineken, we have almost 400 brands around the world, and we are truly global. We're in we're the most global brewer in the world. We're in 192 markets, and so for us to be successful, we really need to understand the local consumers in real detail, and at the same time understand what are the commonalities across the world so that we have the efficiencies of scale. So it's always in insights, it's getting to that global, local understanding. What are the big trends? What are the big shifts that are happening in consumer needs on the one hand that transcend geographies, but then getting down to making it super local and really understanding at a very local level what consumers want and need.
And how do you navigate so many markets with, like you said, the global approach, the local approach? How is it a huge team? Is it I'd love to know how you navigate the different markets.
Yeah, so the insights team in Heineken were around 200 people. Only about 12 of those are sitting in the global team, and the other 185 or so are sitting out in the local markets. And that was a very deliberate choice. It's the way that the company has grown, is being very local, being feet on the ground in the local markets. And that's very much the way we're set up. And our central team here is to help drive the global brands, but also to connect a little bit across the geographies and making sure that we're learning and growing as an organization together.
And how important is that communication then between the teams? Are these different markets all in sync and talking to each other? How do you operate that at a large scale?
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult, and it's something I think technology is helping us a lot in that. To be honest, I think before, as with all big, large matrixed organizations, there are always these complications, and there are global community calls and things like that. Increasingly with knowledge management systems and the use of AI, being able to understand and share more easily and be able to search across and find relevant insights and information from anywhere around the world is so much easier now that these tools have progressed so much.
And Jane, over to you. What role can technology play in insights and measurement?
Oh, massive. I mean, it sort of underpins fundamentally, a lot of the industry and has done for many years. And I think, the requirement that we have as a data and insights organization conducting market research, drawing conclusions from it, is that, we need to be able to operate at speed and scale as well across lots of different markets, like Tony. And so, whether it's how we conduct the surveys, how we collect and cleanse the data, how we use data science, how we use machine learning and AI, all of these technologies and all of these capabilities are evolving at speed, but ultimately they're here to help our clients like Heineken, have better insights faster. Obviously, technology is only one part of the story, though. We have humans who have expertise, whether it's in particular categories or particular markets or particular specialisms, parts of, the marketing spectrum, for example. And so I think the key challenge generally for the industry is how you get humans and technology working together in sync. But we have invested enormously in technology and foundational technologies over the last 3 years or so. And that I think really sets Kantar up well for the future, a lot of which will involve AI, but not wholly.
I was waiting to see when AI would be mentioned, and I think a few minutes has been mentioned. And you've been at Kantar for some years now, right, Jane? So have you seen the use of technology evolve over those years? Did you in the early days probably not use it as much, or maybe you just used it in a different way?
Well, yeah, I've always been involved in my early days at Kantar. I was in the media and digital space. Obviously, I'm still connected to it. And that's always been a very technically complex area, because the way you have to track consumers, understand their behavior, understand their exposure to advertising, for example, by necessity involves liaising with all of the big platforms, whether it's kind of Meta or Google or TikTok or Snap or whoever, Amazon, and being part of their ecosystem. So that's something that I'm very familiar with and very used to. I suppose what has happened over that period is we've had things like cookie deprecation and what was going on there. So the industry's obviously been reacting and managing that. And so all of those individual platforms have undergone huge change themselves. So it's really important as an industry professional to kind of, if it's your job, you need to keep on top of all of these things, understand what's happening and understand the impact, not just for today, but what it means in 2 years' time for measuring advertising or measuring media effectiveness. So actually, it does suit somebody like me quite well. I'm like a magpie. I love understanding things and learning new things. But, it's not for the faint-hearted, I don't think, because, as you know, there's always something happening in the ad tech market or in the marketing sphere that requires you to be nimble and think in a different way. However, I do think it's important to understand the foundations for marketing as well. We can't just constantly be leaping onto new things without understanding how things work more generally. And I think that's something the industry's been perhaps missing a little bit in all the tech excitement over the last few years.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I think with the new channel emerging every other year, it seems like, I suppose you then have to be agile, right, in terms of what you need to do. But I think you've just made a good point there, which is not jumping straight in without the research and the investment, research within Kantar on your product. I think that is that safe to say, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things is, there's always a sort of flavour of the month or flavour of the year, whether it's the metaverse or even influencers. But I think the key thing to remember is, influencers don't exist in a kind of completely separate sphere. You need to be able to compare the impact, short and long-term impact of influencer marketing alongside other channels. So it's the comparability that we really care about. And I think also, developing and making sure we're ahead on all the latest data science techniques to enable comparability for our clients as well. I mean, that's the key thing. Nobody wants a whole load of different siloed pieces of data and information and insights. Our role has to be to bring it all together and make it connect and make it into a story, whether it's to predict what's going on in the next couple of years, or whether it's to help our clients plan over the next few months.
Definitely collaboration, I think, is a constant theme within our industry, right? I think we all need to work a lot better together and ultimately to help the brands. Tony, what are the ways a brand can connect with an audience in your point of view? And you've obviously worked for many different companies, but yeah, it'd be great to understand how you feel. What is the sweet spot for a brand to crack their audience?
Yeah, and good question. And it's a bit of a holy grail. How do we understand how? And if we really, we're constantly learning and evolving our understanding of how best to connect with consumers. And we've so many frameworks we've had over the years of the awareness, consideration, etc. funnels. But I think what we learned, particularly here at Heineken, in such an emotional category, is there's one thing getting awareness and getting your brand known and understood, but really connecting with consumers and getting to the stage where consumers really not just know of you but love you takes that. Getting to a deep understanding of your consumers and showing them that you understand them, and that's where I think you get to that stage where you build brands that really do become those love marks that consumers want to use and seek out rather than just settle for.
And have you changed tact in each market again when it comes to connecting with audiences? Have you played with whether it's creative, whether it's targeting? It'd be great to understand that in a bit of detail.
Yeah, sure. So, and again, I think Heineken's a company that's been around for almost 150 years, and one of the first to really start thinking about branding and mass branding, and things have evolved a lot over that time. And indeed, initially, it was just as I said about that connecting and people being aware. Increasingly, as the ways to reach consumers has evolved, our ability to tailor messages, to understand that we want to tailor different messages to different audiences so that we can really connect. And I guess ideally one-to-one with a consumer. We're a beer company. The idea of sitting down, the ultimate is sitting down and having a beer with somebody. That's how you really connect, how you break down barriers, how you show empathy for a consumer. That's ultimately what we'd love to get to in the world of advertising. Of course, we're not there yet, but the closer we can get to that by segmenting, understanding the specific needs of different audiences and delivering against those will enable us to get closer and closer to the consumer.
How do you keep yourself in the know with that? Is it? It'd be great to understand that as well.
I mentioned before we have community calls. We're always sharing best practices. That's one of the nice things actually about the structure that we have here, where we're so decentralized. As I say, we have feet on the ground in lots of different markets. There aren't too many things that we mandate from the centre. So our local markets have a lot of freedom to experiment, to try new technologies that are emerging, to find new ways of connecting with consumers, which we then share best practices and understand and reapply across markets. That's the beauty of being very decentralized, is that we get a lot of bottom-up learning that we can share very rapidly, which works very well for us.
Yeah, I think all organizations can learn from that, right? You need to always have your global approach for certain needs, certain standards need to be met. But I think ultimately you need to look locally, and all markets are very different, right? The audiences are very different. There's different habits, etc. Jane, so what are some branding myths? I'd love to hear some branding myths from you.
Well, yes, we've recently conducted quite a large piece of data analysis globally using behavioural data, so actual data about what people buy, and attitudinal data about what people think. So massive billions of data points involved in all this. And how people think is an interesting thing, because you can look at it in a couple of different ways. As I said, you can ask them what they think, and then you can actually observe their actual behaviour. But underlying that, actually, the myth of, what all brands want to do is grow. That's like the starting point of any conversation. And whether it's growth in value or revenue terms, or whether it's growth in margin, each brand, each company will be at a different life stage. They all have their different challenges. So understanding whether a brand is big or small and their stage, and also the category they're in. Some categories change a lot more quickly than others. You think of, the coffee market, for example, and how that's evolved from sort of, freshly ground coffee. You've also got instant coffee, and now you've got pods and all sorts of other things that you need to, there are different categories that are being evolved. But what sits underneath it is, when you grow, it's not just about selling more units. Obviously that's what you want to achieve, but it's not quite as simple as that, because in order to sell more units or grow penetration, what we've discovered is that you actually do need to change people's attitudes towards your brand, like Tony was saying. And we've proved that if brands are meaningfully different to more people, they're much more likely to have grow their penetration today, but also grow it in 2 years' time as well. So they're creating a longevity for themselves. And just very quickly, what do I mean by being meaningful and different? Brands need to meet emotional and functional needs. The emotional part is really important. And obviously they can emphasize that in advertising and in marketing, etc. And to be different means you stand out in some way in the category. It doesn't mean you're a unique brand and it's nothing like you. It just means you stand out a bit relative to your competitors. But it also means that for some reason you've created a feeling of unsubstitutability. So people are unwilling to substitute you for something else. They want your brand, more than any other one. So being meaningfully different is something that brands need to constantly keep on top of. Obviously, it's a movable feast. You need to keep being different and relative to your competitors. It's a changing market. So, just simply thinking of it as kind of, how do I shift volume is only looking at half the equation. That's our first point that we're making in the blueprint.
That's really interesting, because you've probably got media owners or publishers listening to this episode now thinking, well, why are we always being benchmarked on CTR and viewability and view through rate if there is a bigger picture, and we should be looked at looking at other things? So how do you navigate that, Jane? Do you consult the brands on this? Are you working with the media owners at the same time? I'd love to understand that.
Yeah, we work with everybody. We work with brands, big and small, and we also work with publishers as well, specifically when we're looking at media effectiveness. But actually, we also work with them as, to help them with their own advertising and marketing as well. We call it what brands need to do when they need to connect with consumers. We call it predispose more people, and it's not a question of just targeting forever and in a sort of closed loop. You need to kind of keep getting more people who are willing to engage with and understand your brand. And I think the conversation that we have with publishers is an interesting one, and it's on many levels actually, because we've recently done a piece of research called Media Reactions, which shows that actually the media brands that you choose as a brand to advertise in actually say something about your brand. Consumers have different feelings about advertising on different platforms. We know, for example, that the top platforms are in this year's report were actually Amazon and TikTok, but for very, very different reasons. Amazon, because the advertising there is perceived by consumers to be highly relevant and highly useful, and TikTok, because not that surprisingly, it's deemed to be really fun and entertaining. But there are some surprises in there as well, that actually older audiences really like the advertising experience on TikTok. So, some of these things are counter to what you might assume as an individual. So we always say, look at the data. But I think, the conversation about, media is a really interesting one because, 10, 15 years ago, you always started your media plan with a base of TV, and then you had a bit of outdoor, and then you built it, and then you added some digital, and, you put some influencers maybe on the top. But now we are seeing more and more plans that actually are, first of all, digital first in a way. And so many more channels are becoming digitized, blurring the boundaries between television and streaming, audio and radio. All of those channels are, however, designed to deliver reach in some shape or form. And it's a question of the right kind of reach. I think this is another kind of myth within the blueprint that we bust, is you're not just trying to kind of reach more people. You have to do it in the right way, on the right channel, and connect with them in the right, in the right emotional context. So there's so much to say on the media front, but yes, we do work extensively with all the publishers, not just global platforms, but local publishers as well.
Amazing. And Tony, how are you judging the success of a new product launch, and how are you using the insights, right? Because it's all good and well, like Jane mentioning, there's such a bigger picture. There's a lot of insights. There's a lot of things that we need to look at. But ultimately, are you just looking at, the end of the campaign and seeing how many extra products you sold, or how many, tangible results? Is that what you're looking at, or is it a mix of the two?
It's definitely a mix, and I would say it depends very much on the objective of that initiative, and I think that's something that we've learned a lot, and certainly the blueprint that Jane referred to, and the approach that we've been building with Kantar has helped us a lot in understanding what are the objectives of a campaign, and of what's the next tranche of growth that we can get from a brand, and therefore what should we expect, what kind of metrics should we expect to go up, rather than very simplistically saying, oh, every initiative is the same and we must only look at one metric, be it sales or click-through rate or anything else. So now we're becoming a bit more sophisticated in understanding for a new brand, what's really important for us is to build that meaningful difference that Jane talked about. And so actually in the early, I was going to say months, but years of a brand launch, we would be really focused on, are we really connecting deeper? Are we creating that meaningful difference? And yes, some other things like the total reach and things could be interesting, but that's not what the aim is. The aim is to build that meaningful difference, because we know that we're not going to be set up for long-term growth unless we've got a proposition that meets consumer needs in a unique way. On the other hand, a brand that's a very mature brand that has been around for a number of years and has an initiative to really drive sales, then obviously we're looking at reach, and is that message getting out to as many people as possible, and is it driving sales directly? But that understanding of what you're trying to do, and not always thinking just short term, but thinking where are we and where are we going to get our growth from over the next months and years, helps us understand better what metrics we should be looking at.
Yeah, and this is, I think, something on the innovation front. This is what in the blueprint we call find new space. And, brands can find new space in a number of different ways, whether it's simply expanding into a new territory where they haven't sold the brand before, or looking at new needs, new motivations, new occasions. And it's really interesting area actually, because it's something that AI, certainly we're using AI in quite a lot now, which is helping clients to rapidly understand the impact, the short and long term impact of new innovations, and indeed to help co-create those along the way. But it's an area also which, big brands, large established brands, have a different role to play than perhaps smaller, more, startup type of brands. Big brands do have the ability to innovate and the right, if you like, to stretch into new categories and make sort of rather bold moves. And so, I'm thinking, Tony, maybe you couldn't go into this, but sort of, low alcohol, no alcohol space is obviously a really interesting growth territory. Smaller brands have to do things in a different way. They can be innovative in their original proposition, but they're fighting against the bigger brands. So their job is to disrupt existing buyers of other brands. They've got a different job to do at that point. So we often talk about this, actually, what's the job to be done? A bit like Tony was saying, like, what's the objective? It's not like all metrics are equal or specific for the tasks. You mentioned earlier, Dal, click-through rates and things like that. And I've always thought those were, just like really unhelpful. We were measuring those in 1998 or 1997 before people realised that digital media could build brands. And, it's really important that brands have a holistic view of measurement, not just a kind of immediate short term, as Tony was saying.
I totally agree. But, devil's advocate, they're still pushing for that. There's still the number at the end that they look at, right? So I suppose it's a definitely more education. I don't know if it's more education or different way of educating, whether it's brands. We've not even talked about the role of the agencies playing. Is it the agencies to the brands and saying, well, this is a metric that you can judge me on and use me as an agency rather than in-housing or using another agency? Maybe that's a little bit at fault here as well.
Yeah, I think for me, we talk a lot about this internally, as I'm sure all big companies do. I think there's always a difference between efficiency and effectiveness, and a lot of those metrics that you're talking about are great to demonstrate that our publishers are delivering, living up to their contracts, are delivering efficiently. Is that important? Yes, it is. And are we going to get rid of it completely? No. But ultimately, that's not the end goal. The end goal is effectiveness. Are we moving on those metrics that will deliver against the job to be done, given the objective for the brand? And indeed, you're right. Sometimes we get so caught up on those efficiency metrics because they're easier to measure. It's a lot easier to measure that. And so people over-focus on that rather than the real end game of effectiveness, which we know is a lot more complicated to get to. And you're right, education is absolutely critical. And I think, to be honest, most people know that. It's just a case of remembering it and understanding that, even sometimes there's always the danger of be careful what you measure, because you can end up making the unintended bad consequences. If you over deliver on some metrics, then you might unintentionally under deliver on your end goal, right? So is it always important to be more efficient? It's easier to measure, but will that drive your long-term objective? Not always, right?
And this is one of my sort of things really about the evolution of digital advertising over the years. I think for the last few years, and this is a generalization, obviously, some marketers have perceived digital advertising as, it's quick, it's performance, it doesn't need to be creative, it can just be sort of short term and all of that. However, there's been a massive move, I think, in the last couple of years by marketers who do now recognise that actually whatever creative you put out there needs to be of high quality. Whether it's a video ad on YouTube, whether it's, something quick and, very short campaign on Amazon, it all needs to be properly considered as part of your brand. Leverage your distinctive brand assets. A consumer's experience of your campaign will be wildly diverse. They'll all see different iterations and manifestations of it. But actually, digital advertising does need to be taken seriously now. So all the things that we talk about in respect of advertising more generally, about how you manifest your meaningful difference, how you make your ads emotionally connect with consumers. You need to do that in short ads as well. And we've actually recently seen some brilliant examples of those. We've started seeing some really great creative examples. Some of them are under 10 seconds, some of them are really fast edited, very short form, not just TikTok, but other platforms as well. And I think we've started to see marketers really embrace digital as a space for high quality creative. And you can have all the reach in the world, but if you've got a bad ad, it's not going to have the impact that you want. So creative, I think, has been under leveraged in recent years. And industry commentators will sort of often hark back to the days of, I remember the Vanish ad in 1982 or whenever it was. Or the all the sort of famous old examples of advertising. And actually, we need to have an ambition, I think, as an industry to do great digital advertising today. And so, but all these things can be measured, and it doesn't mean measured within an inch of their life so that there's no space for creativity or ideas. All it is that we can help improve the effectiveness, as Tony was saying, of ads by perhaps suggesting a different edit, or if people aren't finding that bit funny, maybe it needs to be in a different place. All of these things are adjuncts, helpful aids to the creative process. And obviously, as time goes on, we can measure more and more with AI, looking at features in advertising, looking at what works, looking at what doesn't, depending on the short-term or long-term objective. And, there's loads of helpful research and insights that we've done on all of these topics, actually. And so if I was to say one thing, I would say, more marketers need to take more digital advertising more seriously and do it better.
It's a great point. I think a few points you mentioned was, and I agree, I think marketing needs to be creative, it needs to be impactful, it needs to be engaging. And I think we've somewhat lost our way a little bit with this kind of, the rise of programmatic and technologies. It's so much so that, you kind of need to take a step back and think, well, why am I using all of this? Is it building a more impactful, creative and engaging with the audience? And I think, I don't know if it's just me venting now, but I feel like we've kind of lost our way a little bit. And I don't know, Tony and Jane, whether you feel the same, whether we're too bogged down on the technologies and pipes and results and numbers that we're not actually focusing on the message.
Well, I think you can do both, but Tony will have a
yeah, absolutely. I was going to make exactly that point, Jane, that we talk a lot about truly meeting consumer needs is about art and science, and that's where the magic comes. Is the science is really important, understanding and that deep data-driven understanding of where consumers are, what they want, what they're doing today is absolutely critical. That gives you deep insight. But you need to add a little bit of creativity and a bit of art and magic on top to get that magic. And to Jane's point, it's not as critical. It's probably even more critical in the digital space than it is in more traditional media. Consumers' ability to switch off is so high that if you're not catching attention, if you're not connecting with consumers in the space, they will talk with their feet and they'll move somewhere else, right? So creativity is so critical, and it's not just about and there's some elements of when we talk about creative, it's not just the campaign idea and so on, but it can be, the creativity can come in the medium itself, how you're reaching people. And so much of some of the big breakthroughs we've had has come from getting to people in a very different way. Great example where I'm sitting here in Amsterdam, right next to our Heineken experience, and people walking through a building that explains the story of the Heineken brand, that talks about the brewing process. It may only be hundreds of thousands of people, but it has such an impact, and has helped us understand that getting with a few consumers the chance to tell that really deep story is something very different than telling millions of people a high level story. And digital gives us a lot of opportunities to do that as well. And telling, in some cases, longer stories. In some cases, yes, there's those 2 seconds, 10-second ads really need to break through the clutter. But when you've got a really interesting story that people want to hear, finding the channels that they'll go to listen to those, again, you get that much greater depth, and that's where you can build the meaningful difference. And in our case, for a brand like Heineken, it's around, we've been around for so many years. We're such a big brand. We need to maintain that. And you're not going to do that just by doing standard ads. You have to try and think about how we're going to continue to get people to love our brand, and to engage with us and see that we're doing something different, and standing for something.
Sorry, Jane, I was just going to say that's where Kantar come in, right? And I think you guys have done a great job, and obviously CTAG, we work very closely with you, is getting those additional insights, really understanding whether it's the creative, the channel, the targeting, and going past those 2 or 3 metrics that you can get from anywhere, right? So I think Kantar's played a really big role in our industry in that aspect.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you say that, obviously. But there's some other things that I think are happening, is like the digitization of media is also helping this kind of new type of creativity. We see in this year's media reactions research that actually digital out of home is massively, improved in its perceptions by consumers and by marketers. And I think, again, there's nothing new on this planet, right? But 20, 30 years ago, outdoor posters, large format posters were seen as like the best way to be creative, because you'd have to have really good, really sharp copywriting, really impactful, art direction. And digital out of home allows brands to do that in a new way, and potentially, inject a bit of humour and movement and all of those things that you can't necessarily do in something static. But also, I think the other thing that's going on is we see more sponsored events. As Tony said, sort of creating brand spaces is one way of doing that. But sponsored events and bringing the brand to life for people, I think, is definitely something we're seeing. And also quite innovative ways of bringing the brand to people. There's an IKEA example, actually, which is quite entertaining, which is they realised in the Philippines, which is a collection of islands, that they actually couldn't have that many stores, obviously, to show people their wares. So be more present is something that we say in the blueprint, is something that brands need to do to grow. So actually, instead of setting up more stores, which is obviously highly impractical on a whole load of small islands, they actually installed furniture and their IKEA goods in cafes and gyms and put price tags on them. So like all these small businesses benefited from the IKEA, installations, but they also became like mini shop outlets as well. So there's sort of really imaginative and clever ways that brands can start to distribute themselves differently, I think, now.
Maybe if I can jump in, Jane, I can maybe give another example from Heineken on that, because I think one of the insights and one of the areas that we're focusing on very heavily is there's a bit of a loneliness epidemic that's happening, particularly amongst younger consumers who are, and a lot of it comes from the mobile phone, and even when you're together with people, you're not really together and people are disconnected, and how can we address that as a brand that's all about connecting people? And so we launched what we call the boring phone, in partnership with Bodega, specifically aimed at basically a dumb phone that wasn't a smartphone anymore, that could just take pictures and text, as a way to say, hey, let's reconnect with people. Wasn't to sell hundreds of phones. We're not suddenly going into the phone business. And to your point, how do we measure that? It will ultimately be around, does that resonate with people? Are we talking a language that consumers go, I love that Heineken is standing for something and actually doing something about it? Where we put that message out is quite targeted. We're not going to everybody with that, but it's a great way to get a different experience and bring the brand to people in a fresh way to continue to drive that meaningful difference.
Definitely. I think that's a great example where you need to collaborate and partner. I think another example, when the Barbie release, I think they had about 1,000 different partnerships when the Barbie movie got released, and that was just another great execution, albeit probably with an unlimited budget backing them as well. I've got a final question for you both. If you had a superpower in AdTech, what would it be? I'll start with you, Jane.
Let's all start using normal language. I think the problem with AdTech and the whole industry, and I have lived through it for decades, is that we get caught up in, obscure terminology, which doesn't actually help anybody. It might reinforce people's own sense of their, cleverness and superiority. But actually, we always need to, I think, speaking in language which more people understand is vital. It's vital for brands. It's vital for industry. And it stops some of the BS, I think.
Is it like a special power? You'd zap someone talking all the jargon and the acronyms and come out?
At the moment,
like
I probably just give them
translated all in normal English.
Yes, at the moment, I probably just give them an odd look or something, or rephrase what they said in a way which I think is more comprehensible to more people. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I think I said at the start, my real passion is understanding people. So I guess if I could have one superpower, it would be telepathy, the ability to read the minds of consumers. And if there was a way to build that into technology, that you could really understand somebody's, not just a little bit about them, their demographics, but really what frame of mind they're in, and be able to tailor the message and be there to truly be able to connect with them. That would be the ultimate superpower, I guess. That would be mine.
Amazing. Okay, I think that's all we've got time for today in today's episode. Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Tony, for your time.
Thank you.